I love episode 7 of season 2. It's my favorite episode of the new season. I was just entranced the entire runtime, and so much of it has to do with the tone. This episode has such a deliciously nuanced tone. They're setting a mood that is so delicate. It's providing such a specific emotional background to the events of this part of Ekko's story. And everything about it does feel so right, but also just really, really hard to define. It's just really been stumping me. What Ekko is seeing is happy. Like, objectively, it's something we should love to see. He should love to see, and he does love it, but it's also unbearably sad somehow. So what exactly is happening in my heart? That's my question. Please, viewer, define schnee heart. So the word cathartic kept coming up with the group I was first watching this with when we were trying to describe this mood. And it was weird because cathartic, like as in satisfying, felt like it was kind of capturing maybe about half of the mood. Again, satisfying in that we've wanted to see this. Ekko has always wanted to see all of this. And when we do see it, it is like a relaxing sensation that kind of washes over us. Like we can finally stop chasing this reality we've so desperately been wishing for. But along with that is like an empty feeling, a hollowness, that this isn't our world, that this isn't real. So it's like extremely satisfying in one sense, but then like empty and fundamentally unsatisfying in a totally different sense, in a way that both coexist. Somehow, again, confusing. How? Explain? Another word that felt really accurate here was nostalgic. And yes, there's obviously a lot to be nostalgic about through Ekko's eyes. All these people from his childhood are here. We're seeing them again. But then that's the weird thing. This isn't his childhood. This never happened. And these are essentially different people. They're strangers in some ways. And all these parts where he's just kind of realizing how amazing everything is, seeing the Undercity thriving, seeing all these people so happy. It has that same warmth as nostalgia, but it's not his childhood at all either. In his childhood, the Undercity was a rough place. People were not happy. It was not peaceful. It was violent. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. This could not be further from his childhood. But nostalgia as a label for this feeling still doesn't feel that far off somehow. So once again, how does that work exactly? How can you have nostalgia for a past that did not happen? That is the opposite of what happened. So really my overall question on the tone is, how are all these emotions working so paradoxically but also so fittingly? And maybe the better question is, what function is this tone serving that could only be served by tones so paradoxical? Or maybe it's like this: if it feels so fitting, then it must be matching something in the story. So what paradoxical thing in the story is this paradoxical tone matching so exactly? And really, yeah, unsurprisingly, the real thing I want to understand is this entire confusing, incredible, wonderful enigma of an episode. And the entire confusing, incredible enigma of Ekko's arc as well. I love all of it so much. And really the whole thing has that quality I love about well-written stories, truly deep stories, where it feels so right and yet there is so much that I just don't understand. I'm both satisfied and full of questions. When I feel that way, that's how I know to dig deeper. And I gotta steady myself here, because for this video, as much as I want to talk about like the medallion and the bunny ears gesture and so many other things, I'm going to limit the 1,000 questions I have on the events of this episode down to just 3 or 4-ish. Fourth one doesn't really count, but kind of does. But just so that this investigative journey stays coherent to some degree. Okay, so most importantly, as far as Ekko's arc is concerned, we have this moment. Powder and Ekko at the party, dancing together and having their first kiss. That feels so important. I don't know why. Like, yes, it is wonderfully romantic. It's a beautiful scene. But if you told me to list out potential big character development moments for Ekko, going to a party and having a fun night with an alternate universe Powder that we'll never see again would not even be close to being on that list. And yet this, to me, does feel important on a character level. It feels like Ekko does need this. And Heimerdinger even does tell Ekko pretty explicitly, you need this.
You can start by attending your party. What's the point of a device like this if you don't enjoy the time you have?
So what does the scene do for his character? On some deeply personal level, it feels like Ekko has been waiting for something like this to happen, so that what? And now he's experienced it, so he can do what? We look at his success with Jinx later on in episode 9, and we're so happy that he danced with her so that he could convince her to crash Noxus versus Piltover battle in her tricked out bunny blimp. That all happened because of the dance and the kiss with a totally different character from a totally different universe that doesn't matter to our story at all. How does point A lead to point Z here? And just to bolster the question, yes, the dancing itself was important. And we know that because when Ekko is convincing Jinx, he says, wrong thing, wrong thing, wrong thing. And then he says,
always a dance with you.
And only after he characterizes it as that specifically does he say the right thing that convinces her. So the dance scene does seem pretty important. Ekko sees it as important. The writing frames it that way. Heimerdinger frames it that way. It is clearly accomplishing something big for this character. So what is it? What is it accomplishing for Ekko? And then equally big question in a similar vein here. The thing that Ekko succeeds at in episode 9, convincing Jinx to not give up and to join the war. Vi tries to convince Jinx of the same thing right before the scene, and she fails. But weirdly, like very weirdly, Vi says basically the same thing Ekko says in that scene. Here they are side by side. I know there are differences, but I don't see how those differences are so relevant that we get opposite outcomes. So what is Vi missing in her scene, and what is Ekko getting right in his scene? Third question, which is one that really bugs me on a broader level. Ekko is the present focused character. He is focused on what is, grieving what is, accepting what is, helping what is. His plans are based on what's happening right now. We saw that characterization very clearly all throughout season 1, and we see what happens when Ekko gets knocked out of that in season 1, episode 7, when he gets too stuck in what isn't, too fixated on the powder that he lost. That's what causes him to fail. So now, season 2, episode 7, we take our present focused character and again take him out of that present and put him in an alternate universe that is just not the present at all, and we make him get stuck on what isn't once again, and specifically the powder that isn't once again, but this time it causes him to succeed? How does that work? So it's a two-part question. Number one, why are we putting our present-focused character in the opposite of the present? And part two, he's supposed to fail when that happens. Why does he succeed here? Okay, and then question number 4-ish. The overall biggest, most enormous question for my own sanity. Why do I love it so much if it's not the reality the story is happening in, and this powder basically isn't real as far as the story is concerned? I don't like what-if stories. I don't like dream sequences. I don't like when stories do this kind of departure into an alternate whatever that doesn't really matter, just for some plot thing and some fan service. How am I so invested? This episode is so moving for me. It feels so integral to the whole story, and yet it is factually disconnected from the rest of the story. How does that work? Again, what is in my heart? Please define my heart. Okay, so starting point, here's something that I noticed. It's one of those situations where the story is drawing your attention towards something very specific and going, hey, look at this important thing. Use this to understand what's going on. It's this.
Dad has been raving about your Z drive. Can't remember the last time I saw her so alive.
I must say that since I've met you, lad, I've truly lived.
So alive.
Truly lived.
With Powder, with this AU Powder, 42 Powder, I was trying to understand this character based on what they gave us. And I was kind of getting stuck focusing on Vander's whole fill up your cup thing. But then noticing those alive lines felt like it was opening some doors. Follow me for a second on this. Whatever it means that she's alive, this is something that Ekko asked of her. It wasn't something that she would have done on her own. It took convincing. Which means she was going to let herself continue like this, to continue as not alive. And Ekko convinced her to be alive. And that sounds oddly similar, if you're with me, to the episode 9 scene, where Ekko confronts a Jinx who also, left her own devices, is deciding to not be alive, and Ekko convinces her to be alive. In other words, Ekko isn't just taking some abstract lesson from his episode 7 story. He's not just having character development and then being able to succeed. He is facing the same situation in a different form in episode 7, and he's learning how to navigate that situation successfully. He does succeed in convincing 42 Powder to be alive, and then in episode 9, he's encountering a more dire version of that same situation, and presumably he is navigating it in the same way and succeeding in the same way. Okay, cool, now we're getting somewhere. So how does he navigate this in episode 7? It really comes down to this scene at the tree, and the components of this scene are pretty unusual. First thing is we have Ekko showing Powder the Vi mural. He talks to her very delicately about Jinx without going into any detail, as she tells Powder that he doesn't want her to change, but they have a conversation about how she's not actualizing her potential. She tells him she doesn't want to because she's afraid of losing what makes her her, and then Ekko says this line.
Sometimes taking a leap forward means leaving a few things behind.
And that line is strange and worthy of investigation in its own right. Big question there, just what it means, but also strange because this person he's saying it to doesn't get it.
You're a real mystery, aren't you, mister?
Powder hears this and just doesn't take whatever lesson from it that Ekko is trying to impart upon her. But then it seems like Ekko also hasn't fully internalized it, and later on we see Powder's the one who needs to help teach him the same lesson.
Sometimes taking a leap forward means leaving a few things behind.
So what is going on there? We don't need to look too far. When Powder says this, what is it in response to? It's Ekko saying this.
You ever wish you could just stay in one moment?
So that tells us a lot. Staying in the moment, i.e. being unwilling to leap forward, being unwilling to leave things behind. Staying in the moment equals death. Now that to me is a wild sounding notion. I would think living in the moment would be living, not dying. What could be more living than being in the moment? But even there, I'm not being precise. Ekko doesn't want to live in the moment. He wants to stay in the moment. He is saying he wants this moment to last forever. In other words, he wants to take a point in time and prevent it from changing, prevent it from moving. So not moving equals dying. That's what we're seeing here. I think that answers Heimerdinger too with his line about being truly alive. The question with Heimerdinger is that he is living in the moment with this new lifestyle. This whole Bob Dylan yodel phase that he's going through, he is embracing art, he is helping people now, he's doing all the things that Ekko taught him, but still if you think about it, if you examine it honestly, it is still a very static existence. He is keeping people happy, but he's not really accomplishing anything. And that's because his teacher, Ekko, 1610 Ekko, was also pretty much living a static existence where, if we're being honest, he also wasn't accomplishing accomplishing that much. You go back to season 1, the Firelights were helping people live and breathe, but there was no actual motion, no actual change. And it's because there was no plan, no vision for anything to happen beyond survival and living. But then what? Topple Silco, make life better for Zonites, fight Piltover? No, we see nothing even close to that from the Firelights. Nothing to improve lives on the scientific front, nothing even from a community front, really. They were just being able to provide a refuge where people could breathe freely, and that's pretty much it. There was no actualization of any grand potential because the Firelight community was not focused on potential. They were just focused on the now as a static state. And I realize that that's a debatable judgment to have on the Firelights, but I do think that's where Ekko himself is at in this episode. That's what he's grappling with. And it's interesting that what had a central place in all this in Ekko's community was the mural. It's what helped everyone there process and memorialize the past through acceptance, recognizing that the past is set in stone, it cannot change. But it's almost like that focus, despite it being healthy, despite it being true, has leaked into how Ekko views the present.
Powder's gone, Vi. All that's left is Jinx, and she belongs to
You're
Silco.
wrong. She's still in there. I can reach her.
You can't. I'm sorry, but that's who she is now.
Accepting the past has acted as a model to help Ekko accept the present, but fixating on the unchanging nature of the past has made him treat the present as unchanging as well, which it's not. And we see this Powder, 42 Powder, stuck in the same mindset. She does have this very healthy view of the past. She even has almost the exact same shrine as Ekko has. And what this new Ekko chooses to teach her, to show her, is change, non-staticness, possibility, potential. He takes Powder's set-in-stone idea of Vi and he brings it to life again. He shows change in what seemed fundamentally unchanging, movement in what seemed fundamentally frozen. He shows that something static, something literally dead, can come alive again. How? By seeing the potential within it. And the reason he was able to find that as a gift for this different Powder and give that to her is that that's what she gave him. That's what this whole world gave him. Change in what seemed fundamentally unchanging, the past. And since the past was a model for his relationship to the present, once he sees the past become dynamic and alive with possibility, the present also now becomes dynamic and alive with possibility. And that's what he shows Jinx in episode 9. The scene, of course, follows the same pattern as what we just saw, like to a T. Ekko encounters a dead Jinx. He delicately talks to her about Powder without going into too much detail. He doesn't ask her to change. He shows her a glimpse of that Powder, of that potential. She sees, it's unclear what she understands, but she sees this, the monkeys, that are basically screaming alternate universe you. And Ekko says in a slightly different formulation, that same line about leaving a few things behind.
No matter what happened in the past, it's never too late to build something new.
And now we can see the clear difference between this attempt and Vi's attempt. Listen to what Vi said.
If you come, help use all that explosive potential of yours for good, maybe we could rewrite your story like you did with Zahn.
It sounds very similar, but after examining what Ekko learned in the alternate universe, we can see that there's a gigantic difference between rewriting a story and building something new. Vi did not say write a new story. No, rewrite your story. That's past focused. It's the thing that we saw Kate and Jinx both really in agreement about.
No amount of good deeds can undo our crimes.
The difference between writing something new and rewriting is that with rewriting, there's an implicit judgment on what was previously written. And what you're doing is replacing that. You're going back and undoing the first writing and writing it better this time. Because it was bad. The past was bad, and that's a problem. It's your problem. You're tasked with fixing what was broken. And when what's broken is the past, that is a tall order. But what Ekko is saying is forget the past. It's absolutely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with what you can do now. So why not join me and do that? We're coming up on the point where the third question is now coming into focus. Ekko is a present-focused character, and alternate universes are alternate. They are not the present. So why are we here? How does this contribute to Ekko if it's seemingly knocking him out of his present reality focus? But that's the thing. What we're seeing here is that ARCANE is really pointing us towards a new idea of the present, a much more advanced definition of the present. And this is not just an ARCANE idea. To go on a little bit of a tangent, but not really, it cannot be more relevant. I've encountered this exact question before in the same form before. Magic the Gathering did a block called Time Spiral. It was 3 sets, time themed, and so they naturally decided to do a past theme set, a present theme set, and a future theme set. Listen to the head designer talking about it.
So I understood what the past set wanted, I understood what the future set wanted, but what do you do with the present set? That was the hard one. I'm like, well, it can't just be set in the present, because every set's set in the present, and that's when I stumbled upon the idea of an alternate reality present set.
That episode of Drive to Work came out in 2013. This is a question I've been thinking about for over 10 years. It's the same question. How is alternate reality a way of exploring present reality? reality. Alternate is alternate. It's specifically not the present, so how does that work? But apparently this is a thing. There is something intuitive about it that I cannot deny. There's a different idea of the present that both these pieces of art are working with. So what is that idea? How is this different from my idea of the present? And what new understanding of the present is this pushing me towards? So here's the idea, I think. If I take a die and I roll it, and I get a 4, that doesn't mean the sum total of the reality of the die is 4. No, the reality of the die is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's what a die is. And yes, time moving forward can only choose one path, but when I'm engaging the die, all 6 realities are in that moment. Meaning the concept of potential isn't just thought exercises of what could happen. Potential is a real existing quality that is incarnate in the present moment. And if you're dealing with the present moment without acknowledging the radical possibilities and paths to all different futures, then you're not really engaging the present moment. You're engaging the form of that moment, what that moment will be, what it will turn into once it's in the past. And this is something which is easy to see with like a 6-sided die, but it really is everything. Everything you engage with in reality is like its own 6-sided die or 20-sided die or million-sided die. And every moment isn't just a place within the timeline, it's like an on-ramp to any number of realities. Everything that we call now is really movement towards any number of realities. And yes, just like the die landing on 4, only one of those will end up fully actualizing. But the potential of all the possibilities is a real thing that is existing in every moment. Part of what the present is unactualized potential. It's the fact that it's in motion now and it's going somewhere. Or, hey, get this, put another way, the present is a type of time that has a charge to it. A potential, a recursive impulse. Big surprise, yes, of course this is a pervasive idea in the whole show, because this is ARCANE, and the writers make everything. But what he's describing is this exact idea. Even though he's not talking about time here, having a charge, meaning an energy, meaning a potential towards movement, talking about recursive impulses, meaning repeated multiple impulses within one, and contrasting that with cold.
But cold isn't its name.
As in not moving, as in dead, is a pretty concise summing up of this idea. But anyways, this understanding of the present as something which is not static but dynamic. This is what Ekko is gradually coming to understand throughout this entire episode as he sees these new possibilities, as he's introducing Powder to the new possibilities, as he's seeing her interact with the idea of potential and movement, seeing her transform from static and stationary to alive. And all that comes to a beautifully moving and fitting climax with the dance scene. And there just could not be a better metaphor for this idea of a dynamic present than dance. The charge, the impulse to be in constant motion, to pick up on cues from your partner and that take you to new places.
I was just following your lead.
But also the peace and the warmth and the satisfaction of living in this moment, totally responsive to change from one moment to the next. It's like when people use that phrase about dancing like no one is watching. What people mean there when they're using the phrase, that is a way of talking about being in the present. And there's a reason that a non-stationary activity was chosen for that phrase. We intuitively understand that a crucial part of living in the present moment is feeling the movement of the present moment. And this is wonderfully summed up by Powder reprising Ekko's lesson right back at him.
Sometimes taking a leap forward means leaving a few things behind.
Ekko has now experienced this idea, he's worked with it, but only here does he fully internalize it. Here he applies it to himself consciously in this moment where perhaps it is the hardest for him to move on. We know that he does struggle to move on, especially when it comes to Powder. But with Powder herself urging him to, he's finally able to awaken to movement again. And what follows this is everything about this whole journey. Not just a kiss, but a kiss as if it's the first time. No history, no past, purely in the moment, charged with potential, with the possibilities of all the places this could go. It is yet another intimate dance between these two present-focused characters, and it's beautiful. It is a truly beautiful moment. And this is, by the way, the fascinating thing about Jinx Powder as a character, that we see her as this individual who is torn between these set identities, Powder and Jinx. And today she's this one, and tomorrow she's this one, and she's stuck in the past, and then it's all about the future, and then she's full of rage, and then she's full of hope, and then full of despair. Looking at that, there is no character who is more emblematic of a dynamic present than Jinx. She is completely at the mercy of the movement of the events that surround her. She's just tossed this way and that way by the unpredictable chaos, by the random possibilities of life. And yes, she tries to nail it down, to anchor herself really for her own comfort in these set identities. Complete with her own histories and trajectories for the future based on available data, she is often consumed by the past. But that's not how Ekko sees her. He doesn't see set identities, and he never has. He sees a complete life that is constantly in flux. Even in season 1, he is the only only character who looks at Jinx and sees Powder and interacts with her as Jinx based accurately on experiences from the Powder days. She is a unified individual in his eyes, just one who changes. And really what I mean by that is someone who visibly changes, because everyone changes, but with Powder we see it. She expresses it fully. She lives each change completely. She lets herself be completely redefined by it, completely consumed by it. And yes, sometimes that change is being consumed by the past, because just like potential, the future is part of the present. History, the past, is also part of the present. And much of the change Powder is constantly undergoing is being tossed from present to future to past, and often getting stuck, but then always finding movement again. You look at her entire life, and she never lets herself remain stuck. She never runs from change. Every time she bravely walks towards it. And I think that's why Ekko and Powder are really made for each other in the context of the show. They both stand as these representative figures of the dynamic present in a show that's all about the past and the future. Going back to the scene in episode 9 of Ekko talking to Jinx, I think what we just talked about is so beautifully summed up, so eloquently expressed in Jinx's hair. And yeah, hair storytelling techniques. Who would have thought? Yet another ridiculously niche storytelling thing that ARCANE is amazing at. But yeah, Jinx's hair, we have her iconic braids, which just are Jinx. When we see blue braids, we think Jinx automatically, and apparently so does she. And when we find her in a state where she's seeing that identity is fundamentally bad for this world, something that causes nothing but destruction, that's when we see her like this. She has undone her braids. And what that's expressing is a strong desire to undo Jinx. But then once Dream Circle convinces her to walk away and give up her life, then what does she do? She cuts her braids off. We go from trying to undo the past to actually physically letting go of it. And that's when Ekko confronts her, and once he convinces her to do what again? To not just let go of the past because it's meaningless, but to build something new instead, then what do we see? She gives herself a new hairstyle. She builds something new. It is perfectly articulated in the storytelling language of hair. So cool. But just to go back and now really truly dig into the scene in detail, now that we're acquainted more fully with the principles the story is exploring, first of all, the whole phenomenon of the Z-Drive makes total sense. Before it was hard not to see it as just Ekko being allowed to fail again and again, which isn't wrong, that is what it allows him to do, but what it is on a character or a thematic level is this recursive impulse thing. It's him accessing the moment not as a static single thing, but in all of its possibilities. He's gone from a character who lives in the moment to a character who is now super engaged in the moment to a degree that no one else is, because really no one else deserves to have that level of access to the now. Ekko is the only character who understands and lives this concept so deeply. I mean, he is even named after the concept, and within his arc, the Z-Drive and that ability is how the story rewards his new level of understanding. So he uses that. We see this example.
I just want to talk to you about Jinx.
And actually is really interesting and just kind of sad going back to the Vi scene.
Jinx?
Haley Steinfeld makes it very noticeable through her voice acting how Vi is pointedly calling her sister by the name Jinx here, like in this kind of casual way that kind of also screams, hey look, I'm doing it right, finally. But unfortunately at this point, in this moment, Vi doesn't realize that she's found her sister running from that identity, taking out her Jinx braids, picking at her iconic pink and blue fingernails. Vi is just kind of late to this in the worst way possible. Jinx doesn't want to be reminded of her Jinxy tendencies right now. She doesn't really want to be anything right now. She wants to be nothing. And I think that's also why Ekko's slip-up gives her pause. And at first I thought there's something to the fact that he corrected himself to Jinx. Pow, Jinx, he's saying both, which is kind of a way of saying neither. It's like saying Powder, Jinx, whatever, I don't care. He's engaging her as a dynamic entity, as a constantly changing identity, which is what she is, absolutely. And then of course he mentions the dance, and not in an annoyed way, in an appreciative way. Vi cannot deal with a constant give and take. She can't deal with a change. But the dance is something that Ekko embraces about his childhood friend. He is willing to dance with her, whether she's Powder or whether she's Jinx or whether she's both or whether she's neither. He just values his friend. And it is unclear what Jinx understands about Ekko and the Z-Drive in this moment. It does seem like she's starting to put it together somewhat, or at least realize something weird is happening. Ekko's body does start to literally smoke throughout this conversation. That's kind of weird, not hard to wonder what's going on with that. But whatever she understands, we certainly do get this moment of her seeing the monkeys in the Z-Drive. And they are the same monkeys, but they're pink and they're powdery, they're not hurting anybody, and they're actually part of some device that's saving Ekko. These same chaos monkeys of destruction, the Jinxiest of Jinx symbols, they can be something different. They can be part of some new invention. And then Ekko tells her that the past doesn't matter. He tells her that you can build something new, and you're the person I want to do it with. Not with Powder, not with Jinx, but with you, my changing, dancing friend. I started off this video mystified and awed by this incredibly nuanced tone, and that's also something which is falling into place now with all we've discussed about this powerful idea of time. Nostalgia for a past that didn't happen. It's true that that past wasn't a path that reality took, but this timeline and all that it is, all these characters are, is still part of that past moment in time. Just like when I roll my die, I'm engaging with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All those possibilities exist in that moment, but only one moves forward. And all of life really is that way. Every moment is charged with countless possibilities, and acknowledging that potential really is just us knowing those moments more intimately. So usually nostalgia is warm feelings about the past as static snapshots, but this is the warmth of reliving this particular aspect of the past possibility that we rarely even think to remember was there in the first place. Ekko says it himself.
I used to dream the Undercity could be like this, but somewhere I got consumed by all the ways it wasn't.
Part of his childhood wasn't just experiencing what did happen, it was knowing what could happen. Part of the past was dreaming. Part of the past was the movement, was the dance. And as we learn from Ekko, those possibilities aren't just fleeting nothings. It's not just thought experiments about a future that truly is set in stone. No, we don't like fortune cookies here. Those untapped possibilities were seeds that never germinated, some of which are still with us. So the phenomenon of nostalgia for a past that never happened really matches how we should always feel about the present. If we are fully and accurately engaged with the present as Ekko is teaching us to be engaged with it, in all of its infinite built-in timelines, most of which never happen, then we will constantly be feeling the warmth of acceptance of all these possibilities, even knowing that all these possibilities, which are existing side by side with us, will never be presents or past that we can experience. And this is what also explains the other mysterious feeling I highlighted earlier, a catharsis that's somehow unsatisfying. Unsatisfying because we know it's so close to being real, but it isn't. That is such a powerful description of the experience of dreaming. The vision of what could be is so close that it feels real, but the fact that it's not real, you're not in that reality just yet, that creates a subtle sense of discomfort. An agitation to act, to change things, to move, it charges your experience. And that is another feeling that ARCANE is urging us to experience when we are engaged in this dynamic present that Ekko is teaching us about. Seeing the possibilities is so close to reality that we're already feeling the satisfaction from them, and yet still we have that agitation to act. So what we're seeing here is that this episode is exploring an extraordinarily complex idea of time, but before we even get there structurally, before we even really apprehend what that idea is, we are immersed in a tone that gives us the exact experience of that idea emotionally. We feel what it feels like to live with this multifaceted idea of time before we understand it. And then once we do understand it, it feels right because we've already come to know it on a deeper level. That is genius level writing. It's unbelievable. Wow. Okay, we'll stop here. Subscribe. I gotta self-criticize a bit on this one. Not for the idea, but just for how it sounds. And I don't even know if this is worth mentioning, but it does bother me when things sound too esoteric and abstract. I'm not someone who believes that philosophy should sound fancy. I think it should sound normal, just like everyday conversation, except with a higher standard of clarity. And I say should, it's a meaningless word, but I'm saying should mostly just because people who make ideas sound overly fancy are usually just spouting fluff in my experience. And all this talk about time and the now and dynamic potential incarnate in the moment, it bothered me when I was writing this, it bothered me when I was saying it, that the idea sounded so overly fancy. That's not something that I like, it's not something that I respect. But then also, as much as that quality bothers me, I do value what the idea needs even more, and it needs to sound that way in order to be expressed clearly. It's just a hard topic to talk about in any other way. So I don't know if people get as bothered about this as I do. Maybe I'm talking to no one here except myself. I don't know. Anyway, if you like the content, support the channel on Patreon. Huge thanks to everyone there as always. Shoutouts to new high tier patrons, Plume, Stuart Cook, Jeff Otsby. Really, truly meaningful whenever people make the gesture of offering that kind of support. So thank you. I have a lot more to say about episode 7, so maybe next video will be about that too. I'm also thinking about doing a video on the question of whether Jinx is truly dead from a writing perspective. I'm also thinking about making a video about the differences in writing between the two seasons. Either way, more ARCANE content is on the way, being produced right now as this is going up, so stay tuned for that. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.